Okay, you're all set.
Okay, we're all set. So this is the Ad hoc Sustainability and Resilience Committee of the Common Council, May 11th, 2022. We're starting the meeting at 6:07. So I'm calling it to order. Right now we have with us Tom Livingston, Tom Keegan, and myself, Lisa Shanahan, the chair. Josh won't be joining us tonight. Our committee's changed, so we no longer have Heidi on the committee. So Tom, I think we still need 4, right?
Right.
And then we're waiting for Dominique Johnson to join us. She's caught up in another meeting. So that's that. For public participation, I know that you have something that you want to share with us, Katie, but I don't believe that there's anybody else on the call. Is that correct?
There are 2 attendees.
Oh, 2 attendees. So if somebody would like to raise their hand and make some public comment, this would be the time. And do you have that? You can handle that, right, Katie, to let people?
Yep.
Okay, great. So Linnell Jones would like to be.
Yep.
So the way public comment works is that we have 3 minutes to speak. So Ms. Jones, thank you for joining us, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
You can.
Okay, thank you. My comments were about 5 minutes. You can cut me off at 3. I appreciate this opportunity to speak. No question, I've shared a lot of information via email, but following listening to your first meeting, hearing your objectives and thoughts about what your committee hopes to accomplish, it occurred to me that it was possible that no one had actually ever read the city's MS4 permit, any stormwater management plan, or understood the advantages creating a stormwater authority would bring to our city. The MS4 permit, an easy read, is included in the 2021 draft stormwater management plan, whose link I shared. The city's current MS4, issued in 2017, expires this July and is not automatically renewed. 4 municipalities in Connecticut were sued last year for MS4 non-compliance, and I'm not convinced we're in compliance. You can judge for yourself. The Clean Water Act is federal law. Once you read the MS4, you will understand the whole point of requiring annual stormwater management plans is so the city will be forced to set goals, measure, see its own progress regarding stormwater management, and improve. Basically engage in an iterative process on 6 minimum control measures, including public outreach, public education, and illicit discharges. If you haven't read anything yet, please at least read the MS4 permit. Your agenda today includes Alexis, so I look forward to hearing her presentation on coastal and tidal wetland regulations. One of your stated concerns was environmental justice and holding the wealthy and educated, those able to make choices regarding environmental decisions, accountable to the Clean Water Act and environmental regulations, is the flip side of protecting those less advantaged, less able to make decisions and choices that wealthy waterfront yacht owners can make. I highly doubt Alexis will say that a wealthy private property owner can fill tidal wetlands without a permit. According to the consultants working with P&Z on the industrial waterfront rezoning, 1/3 of our city's budget is spent on environment and infrastructure. But as you see in my stormwater management plan draft comments, DPW told me a lack of money was why many of the MS4's minimum control measures were not addressed. Evidently, the stormwater management plan is not a priority, and the fact that I had to ask customer service for over 2 weeks just to get something posted following when it should have been posted proves this. This does give me an opportunity, however, to point out 2 very hardworking Norwalk employees, Michelle and Lori from customer service, who it is nice to see also got complimented in the city's efficiency report. When I first called and asked, customer service had no idea what I was asking for, but they figured it out. And along the way, we all figured out few had any awareness of this important report. Last night at the public meeting for the industrial waterfront rezoning, it was clear in the chat and Q&A that the public is very concerned that the new zoning, bringing increased development and density to flood-prone areas, would challenge our stormwater infrastructure. The consultant wrote to everyone that the new plan would provide the framework for future land uses in Norwalk's waterfront industrial area, adding that how to prevent the area from flooding and how it is managed is a significant consideration of the plan, but offered no details, no example. The MS4.
We're at 3 minutes, so if you want to wrap up your most important.
No, that's it. The MS4, on the other hand, does. I do suggest, because nothing says that your comments are limited to 3 minutes. It's been my experience, you had up to 5 minutes. But again, it's taken a while to even get my information out to you. And I just thank you for reading what I shared.
Okay, thank you, Linnell. Katie, can you send, I think that you did this already, but can you send the invite to Darlene at councilmemberyoung@gmail.com? You might have done that already, but
Yes, I'll
just
resend it.
maybe at the top. Okay. And
Okay.
just tell her will do. Okay, so she's good. Great. Are there other members of the public who would like to be heard? If so, raise your hand, please. Okay, it looks as though,
We have one comment that was sent by email.
okay, great. That was my next question.
Yep, oops, sorry, I moved too quickly. It was an email sent by Diane Lauricella, and it was a request to enter an article into record. The article was a Newsweek article titled "Cities Brace for Apocalyptic Flooding as New Age of Superstorms Dawns."
Awesome. And so I think everybody got that in their email, and I encourage everybody to read it, but we can put a cite to that article in our minutes for next meeting, if that works. Poor Katie, I asked her to do 3 things at once. She's got to write Darlene and also cite that article. So great. So I think what we can do right now is close public participation. We're waiting for one more of our committee members to join. Oh, there's Darlene. Hi, Darlene. Thank you very much for joining us. Now we have enough people to vote on the minutes.
Hello.
Hello, Darlene. We know.
I'm in my car leaving the interviews for the summer program. This is just like really crazy. And then I got 7 o'clock. How are you?
We're good. We're so happy you're joining with us. So if you want to mute, we'll just tell you when you have to take a vote. We're going to vote on minutes. And then we're going to have a little bit of time for you to get to where you want to get to before we need to talk about a letter that Alexis would like us to vote on.
Okay.
So
All right.
why don't I say, is there a motion to approve the minutes for April 14th? Thank you, Mr. Livingston. We do know that there's one comment that Dominique wanted to have made. I took a picture of it so I can read it. She would like to have the following change made on the top of page 3. It should read, Ms. Johnson asked whether in Bridgeport, the industrial neighborhoods were factored into the social vulnerability index. So with that change, can we take a vote to approve the minutes as amended? All in favor? Darlene, I assume you said yes on the minutes.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. Good. We're all good on that. So now what we're going to turn our attention to is we're lucky to have Michelle, who's one of the land use planners at Planning and Zoning, along with Sydney Collins, who's a UConn student, and they're going to talk about the outreach to the Sono community resilience efforts. So I'm really glad that Darlene was able to make the call to listen to that. So I'm turning it over to you, Michelle.
Great. Alrighty. Sydney, do you want to share? And then we'll get going.
Yep, awesome. Just give me a sec.
Alrighty. Well, first of all, I want to thank for letting us present to you guys our presentation is going to be focusing on what we kind of covered, outreach that we've done, and hopefully anything that we present to you can help assist goals for your committee and other initiatives within the city. Next introductory slide. So I'm Michelle Anjeski, and I'm from Planning and Zoning. You guys probably all know Alexis, who is on the call. She was kind of the advisory position here. And then this was led by Sydney. If Sydney wants to do her intro. Oh, you're muted, Sid.
For some reason it said when I shared my screen, my audio got disabled. So hold on, I'm just going to reshare that.
No worries.
Okay, can you still see my screen?
I think it's loading up. All right.
Okay, can you see it?
Yep.
Sorry about that technical difficulty. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here tonight. I'm Sydney. I'm an undergraduate at the University of Connecticut, and I'm involved in this project through Climate Core, which is a program offered through UConn, in which students get to work closely with the municipality to complete a climate change related project. As well as I will highlight, you could see on our first slide that this project also was funded by the Change Grant. This grant was a grant provided by UConn in which we applied for just to gather additional resources to expand the capacity of the project.
And then these efforts were also helped out by another student, Harrison, who's not with us tonight. And then as you guys heard from John Trzynski from the Circa, who's kind of leading the Resilient South Norwalk project. He participated on, offered to participate during our workshop segment. So before I get into like the project goals, why did these efforts start? So as Sydney stated, the UConn Climate Core is a program offered by UConn, and it enables students to work with municipalities and tackle projects on climate. So Sydney reached out to us. She wanted to work on a project that was climate related, wanted to do some outreach within the city. Other motives for this efforts is some action items with sustainable CT, Circa's first, our phase 2 of the Resilient Connecticut kind of identified South Norwalk as a resilience opportunity area. So that was another contributing factor. And then overall, this like aligned with a lot of current interests within the city. So our project goal was to identify and educate some vulnerable populations to understand how environmental hazards may affect South Norwalk demographic. So I highlight 2 kind of buzzwords that we might use throughout the presentation, and then some areas within Norwalk that you guys are probably very familiar with that is prone to flooding. This is Water Street, and then I believe this is the corner of South Main and Meadow when it got washed out. So just kind of highlighting the areas that are occurring in South Norwalk.
And then additional tidbit, there's a lot of conversation right now about equity. And so we wanted to look on how we could incorporate equity considerations in our project. So Michelle highlighted vulnerable populations. So we wanted to see how vulnerable populations such as residents in South Norwalk not only would be impacted by climate change, but also how can we incorporate them in the planning process. So as we synthesize information, how to incorporate them in that outreach and engagement process.
So some of our data collection methods, primarily we used 3. We focused on stakeholder interviews. These were a couple of elected officials, staff members, and then we were able to contact a representative at the Maritime Aquarium. These stakeholders ultimately help guide outreach for our workshop, and then get a better understanding of who lives in South Norwalk, how we can reach them. These were chosen because they have existing relationships in South Norwalk, work with residents regularly, and there's, I'm sure, several other good stakeholders that we weren't able to contact. we weren't able to interview some library representatives, and Norwalk Housing Authority is definitely another one that would be good contact for this. And then the other mode of data collection was surveying. So we did a table in South Norwalk for one day. This was on North Main Street. And we offered Dunkin' Donuts, and through the Change grant, we were able to incentivize using gift cards for people to take the survey. And the survey was to focus on understanding of residents' concerns of environmental hazards they might be experiencing. And then our last method was ultimately the workshop to help guide public input and educate the public on this topic, kind of start the conversation about resilience. So here are some of the interview questions that we used. We'll be able to share this slideshow with you guys to provide a reference point, but we're ultimately just looking to answer these questions of where do people congregate, what do people care about, and what's the best way to reach people. So that was ultimately the objective of these interviews. So some takeaways from our interviews. What are people concerned about? Personal property came up. People in South Norwalk, I think, from the perspective of the stakeholder, that personal property was more important or more concerned about than residential property, just because of the high renters in the area, and protection of this personal property should be a priority to acknowledge here. That churches are a good resource to utilize, although we were able to reach out to several and have made contact with a couple, but we didn't have too much luck there. And then marketing is half the battle with outreach. We found that by this we're meaning selling someone on a topic to get involved in so we can better understand the community. So it's really knowing who your audience is and what they use to get their information, using your wording very carefully and strategically of how people kind of resonate with certain words. I don't have a background in marketing, but I'm definitely, it was like a learning experience through this. Another piece was education on insurance and preparedness to business owners. So more specifically, properties that are in the floodplain, the loss of the product and equipment can be expensive, and insurance could limit the potential to replace expensive items. And not a lot of business owners know that. They might get a cheaper insurance and then an event happens and they're not able to replace what they want to replace. And then no local relief funding programs exist in Norwalk currently, but a stakeholder identified that possibly using ARPA funds, you could put together a local relief program. And then lastly, Maritime Aquarium offers a resilience exhibit. This kind of highlighted for us that, really identify and understand that existing resources are out there, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and be able to use platforms like this to incentivize, or not incentivize, but to promote it so people can go and learn more about this topic.
Awesome. So I just want to introduce some of our results, findings, and takeaways about our surveying as an outreach method. So first, I linked in this slideshow, which you'll be able to access our survey questions that we used, just because they overlap a little bit with our workshop questions, which we included at a later slide, but also there was a lot of questions. So this is probably kind of segues with one of our takeaways, is it was pretty dense, and we'd want to work on condensing that, so not to act as a barrier to participation. But first, just some of the results of which we heard from the community is barbershops and police and emergency services came up quite plentiful as community assets and being important to the Norwalk community. these two next bullets kind of segue with each other, talking about flooding after storm events along South Main Street and Water Street as two examples that came up, as well as acknowledging stormwater runoff into the Long Island Sound. So what is the capacity of our stormwater infrastructure, as well as the wastewater treatment plant, and how that could contribute to flooding, but also cause impacts from climate change consequences. A residence in Harborview came up as high risk for climate impacts. So the value and location to Long Island Sound and beaches, as well as green space such as Vets Park, came up as additional community assets, but also locations that could be impacted by storm events and flooding. And then lastly, civic groups came up as community assets in the sense of there seemed like a high amount of community cohesion and relationships, and that will be something to be depended on with additional climate change impacts. So what findings did we have? Say it again.
You sounded pretty adamant.
All right, I'm just going
I
to
think
move
I might
forward,
have
but feel free,
feedback.
if anyone has any questions, just feel free to unmute, just because I can't see the chat box. So some additional takeaways from our survey process, things that we identified as pretty successful, what Michelle mentioned that we had as incentives and payment. So we had Duncan, when we did on the ground surveying, just try to pull people in. And then we also had $5 gift cards for participants that completed the full survey. I thought this was really positive because oftentimes members and communities can kind of get burned by research in regards to doing all this time, and then maybe they don't have access to the results, or you know, they're kind of acting as a consultant services, and so they should be compensated for that. So it's awesome that we had resources from the Change Grant to be able to provide that. Another success is just doing on the ground surveying. So going to where community members are to try and solicit their input. Additional considerations for future efforts that folks in the sustainability ad hoc committee might partake in is locations. So where are high traffic areas, or where is your priority study? And yeah, where would you gather the most community insight? What time of day are you doing this? We did do it in the middle of the day, so how could that be kind of a deterrent from participation? What survey platform and format you use. So for on the ground surveying, originally it was a Google Form survey, so we had an online version, but we printed out packets for on the ground surveying, thinking that it would just increase accessibility to it. But it was hard to then scribe the information. And when we gave someone out a survey packet, there was not a high chance of it being returned. So that should be another consideration, as well as like, what is the format for questions? So, you know, is multiple choice or ranked choice voting a little bit easier than just like paragraph style? That's kind of burdensome on the individual to kind of really craft their answer. And then lastly, thinking about relationship building. So Harrison and I, obviously we're really grateful to go to Norwalk and get a lay of the land, but we were also the one forefronting some of the surveying. But if we had membership from a community organization or someone that residents walking by would have familiarity with, how could that have increased kind of traction to our table or increased trust with us for people to ultimately fill out their survey? And Michelle, I'll hand it back to you.
So for our workshop objectives, as I reiterated before throughout this presentation, this was really like an educational piece and to start the conversation in the public about resilience. So providing background and terminology at a real basic level of certain buzzwords that relate to resilience, like flooding and heat, and those corresponding words to resilience that come up often. Our presentation also had a piece from Circa, John Trzynski. He was able to attend and provide an educational piece of kind of their past work with Circa, well, his past work with Circa on the Resilient Connecticut projects. And then South Norwalk was selected out of 7 in Connecticut to do a more focused area on like a vulnerable area. And then then we're going to use polling and breakout sessions to listen to the public and get an understanding and concerns, just really open up the platform for people to discuss this topic.
All right. I apologize. My brothers are just going to bed. So if you hear some little kind of gabbling back there, that's them. But so just next talking about, oops, workshop advertisements. So what did we do to kind of bolster and amplify that this workshop was happening? So we tried to be strategic in how we did outreach. We didn't want to just put it on like the community site, because we wanted to really try and target residents in South Norwalk. So we did this through this flyer distribution you can see here. We had a flyer in English as well as Spanish, and we tried to market that not only did we compensate for the surveying with a $5 gift card, but we also had compensation for participation in the workshop. So participants would receive $20 gift card for the first 40 people to RSVP as well as attend the workshop. So just acknowledging how much compensation we had, that was our way to kind of do it, to incentivize people to come and pay for them for their services. So this flyer was distributed to local businesses, barbershop, laundromats within our study area, as well. It was directly emailed to additional stakeholders such as churches, schools. And then an ad was also run on Facebook solely to the South Norwalk residents. So you can see here, we really tried to prioritize outreach to that specific population.
So Sydney, I love all this background that you're giving us on how you got people together, but just because I'm very conscious of time, we're going to lose time for Alexis. Do you have kind of the summaries of what happened at the workshop? Can we get to we can only meet until 5 of 6 because we've got a Parks and Recs meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are all the questions. Again, you'll get a copy of the slide so I can brief through that. I guess lessons learned is what is probably most important. So I'll try to skim the most important things. But one, we had a virtual workshop because we thought that decreased barriers to participation in the sense of people that have a computer can just easily hop on. However, we ultimately didn't have any participants in the workshop, but this does strike as a learning opportunity for why is that? So one, this specific area has historically been difficult to conduct outreach and engage with, and this kind of story highlights that. But what are additional ways in which we can build relationships with community members to tap into their existing networks, also have existing trust built up with them to conduct outreach in the future? So that could be attending more community meetings, that could be hiring some local students or community leaders to do some of that surveying or workshop outreach. So like Michelle mentioning, knowing the audience and marketing whatever you're doing is key. So not only the people that you're trying to target, but also what is the language that we're using in regards to community resiliency was a little bit disconnecting. People might not be familiar with that concept. However, when you say flooding and heat, there's automatically some more understanding of what that means, as well as I think compensation was a great takeaway to use in future efforts.
And I think the last couple of slides are just some resources. So by internal resources, these are kind of city and council like data and what we used and what's out there that could be used for resilience. And then our next slide is public resources. So this was incorporated into our workshop. If people were able to come, they would have had these resources. These are just things that are out there already that people can go and get educated with. Some of these resources were provided by Michelle DeLuca and other members of the stakeholder groups. So so the next steps with this efforts, we have remaining funding from our change grant. So we're gonna use that to support the Resilient South Norwalk project that's going on. Well, that will begin in June and use that for kind of more outreach on the same kind of efforts and topics. So kind of works out nicely. And then just hopefully this can just be a learning curve for us and a resource to something that's already been done and people that have been contacted before, maybe putting the word in people's ear about resilience. And yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, ladies. I mean, it's really, you certainly did a ton of work to try to get into the community, and that's definitely shows. And it's kind of a learning experience for us too, to know how to maybe populate this important information we're going to get out of the climate workshop to this group. So I'm just going to turn it quickly over to Alexis, because I don't want to lose time on a couple of things that we really want to get covered by her. And then also we've got to talk about that letter.
Yeah, so thank you, Michelle and Sydney. They definitely worked hard to try to engage the community, and they definitely found that it is not an easy task. And I know that you have your, the vulnerability assessment with the Nature Conservancy coming up on the 23rd, and you have to really kind of actively try to get people to participate. So, and that's one of the hardest parts with when you do proactive kind of conceptual planning. It's just hard to really get engaged unless, we have a big flood event, which I don't want to wish for, but it's tough. So I do applaud them. And so, right, you mentioned the letter. The Planning and Zoning Office is applying for a grant through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has Long Island Sound Future Funds grant, which is better funded this year than in past years. There's a lot of interest in applying for that fund. And one of the things we're applying for is a citywide flood resiliency plan for the city, recognizing that we have a lot of different components that are going on. You mentioned the workshop on the 23rd and other efforts, and the plan would kind of pull those all together, and we'd have a consultant kind of produce some actionable items that are implementable and are spelled out enough to allow for future implementation grant funding. That's really the purpose of having a plan, is to have kind of a clear path forward for other implementation activities that can be prohibitively expensive without grant funding. So as I mentioned, I would love to, if possible, I have just a general letter of support from the ad hoc committee. You and your work are mentioned in my grant application as part of my my narrative explaining the investiture of the city and all layers of city government into looking into resiliency as a whole, but in particular knowing that we have flooding issues throughout the city. And we kind of need a prioritized, cohesive framework to try to figure out how do we stem the impacts of flooding in the future, or at least make us better able to adapt to these sea level rise issues and these intense storm events that seem to be more and more frequent.
And so what Alexis and I were talking about, that's the short version of it. So Alexis shared a letter with me. I went through it. I shared it with, I've shared the concept of it with Tom Livingston. We probably need to get Mario to tell us whether or not this is something we can do as a committee without council approval, or whether we can sign it as members of the ad hoc sustainability committee, not perhaps on behalf of it. So we're going to sort that all out. The reason why we're in a little bit of a rush is that the letter is due on May 19th. So we don't have a lot of time to sort this out, but we will. So I'll share it with the whole group. Just generally, we're saying that we're supporting the work of Alexis's group to apply for this grant from the Long Island Sound Futures Fund. And so I wanted to get a sense from the committee that if we support this letter, and assuming that we can legally do it, which Tom and I will sort out with Mario. So there's 4 of us, or there's 5 of us now. So, I meant to say for the minutes that Dominique Johnson joined us at 6:30. I had you joining us out. Is that about right? Okay, great. So the minutes should reflect that Dominique joined us then. So Tom, do I need to take a vote? How would you handle this? Yeah.
Well, what I was thinking, and Lisa and I spoke about it briefly beforehand, is if we can draft a letter and it could be signed by me as council president, Lisa as chair of this committee, I can circulate it to the council, assume they have no objections, then give it to you. I mean, we don't have a caucus or meeting beforehand, but that's sort of what I'm thinking. I don't know how others feel in the committee, but that sort of goes through the process just to make sure I think coming from the council as a whole might even be better. And then,
Yeah.
But I don't want to do it without the council, sort of blessing it, but I can do that pretty informally unless somebody else in the committee has a feeling.
Is anybody against it? Let's put it
Yeah.
that way. Okay, cool.
We'll figure it out. We'll figure out how to do it.
Right. Well, Alexis did the heavy lifting. She gave us a draft letter, so we could work off of that. So that's great. Okay, so that was like the important thing I wanted to get through with you, Alexis. And then I wanted you to give us a general sense of what you do, what does Deep do? Just give us a sense of, when people call us up and say
Sure.
that's happening in their backyard, what are those things? Thank you.
All right. What does Alexis do? So yeah, I don't know. I didn't make a presentation. I know that I've spoken to some of you, and as Lisa said, you get some questions about environmental stuff and who does what. So for the last 20 years, I've been the staff person that administers the inland wetland and watercourse regulations within the city of Norwalk. It's Mr. Keegan and Ms. Shanahan both know they were formerly on that wetland agency before becoming council members. And so those regulations are limited to inland or non-tidal, non-saltwater influenced wetlands and inland wetlands. So all regulation kind of comes down from a federal level. There's enabling legislation, and then states adopt legislation, and then they give the power to the municipality. There's all these kind of this layer of enabling. And so the Clean Water Act is where the inland wetland regulations gets its authority from, and so on. So you had mentioned tidal wetlands versus inland wetlands. Tidal wetlands are a very different beast. Tidal waters and tidal wetlands are regulated by the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection, or DEEP, technically, Department of Energy and Environmental Protection now. So they regulate anything waterward of what's called the CJL, the coastal jurisdiction line, and that's defined by an elevation depending on what municipality you're in along the coast. In Norwalk, that elevation is elevation 5.4. So waterward of 5.4, you're in the waters of the state, and they regulate what is happening there. But then additionally, Norwalk, through our zoning regulations, has our coastal area management regulations, and those regulate activities proximal to the coast. And that is, like I said, part of the zoning regulations. And those are set up a little different than the inland regulations in that they regulate certain activities within the coastal area management zone, but definitely not all activities. There's quite a few exemptions to those. There are some areas where there's an overlap, where there's both inland wetlands, which are based on soil type, and tidal wetlands, which are based on soil type, elevation, and vegetation. So you can, in some instances, have both a tidal waters, tidal wetland, and then an inland wetland, depending on the topography, and therefore multiple layers of regulation. That's kind of the basics. I don't know if there's any particular question that you have, just
I have a
fire away.
Yeah, I mean, for Alexis, you've answered so many questions about can this tree come down or not, both on the coast and then also on rivers. So can you give us a general sense of when trees can come down, when you can put fill? We've seen people put leaves in ponds, just a few of the things just to alert us to us council people to this is a problem.
Okay, so trees on private property, if they're within, we regulate any activity in a wetland, in a inland wetland, in a inland watercourse, or within 50 feet of a inland wetland, or 50 or 100 feet of an inland watercourse. Most activities are regulated. Some of them are considered as of right, but we have a form for people to declare if they're doing something that they feel is as of right and doesn't warrant a permit. The homeowner doesn't get to decide that. We look at what they're proposing and then we decide whether they warrant a permit or not. So typically the removal of one tree, particularly like if you have a dead tree within that upland review area is what we call it, the person can remove it. If they want to remove the tree just because they don't like the tree, then it gets a little bit more involved, and I often kick it to the wetland agency. There is nothing that's outright prohibited in the inland wetland regulations. What it does say is that you have to get a permit first. So there's nothing that says you can't remove trees, you can't pipe a water course, you can't fill a wetland. It doesn't say you can't anywhere. It just says that you have to gain the approval with a inland wetland permit before you do that work. As a general rule of thumb, once you change the natural and indigenous character of the land, so if you have a woodland that then becomes lawn area, or if you have a woodland that had understory vegetation and maybe those canopy trees were retained, but all of the understory vegetation was removed, you've changed the natural and indigenous character of the land, and you would need a permit. So one tree can be kind of a tough call. It depends on the tree, but once you kind of do clear cutting, that's a problem. And then filling can be a somewhat inclusive term, and that can not only be kind of fill of dirt or rock or sediment, but if it's in enough quantity, wood chips and leaves or grass clippings. So all those organic materials that I just mentioned, they are organic materials. When they decompose, they release their components, and a big part of their components is nutrients. And so all of those have excess nutrients, and excess nutrients are a significant problem for any water course. You hear about hypoxia in Long Island Sound, and that's a nitrogen-based issue that causes dissolved oxygen to plummet. So all of those are issues. Those are all very hard to regulate because it's hard to find who dumped all the leaves or all the grass into the wetland. But when we can parcel it out, we certainly do regulate that and enforce that regulation.
Dominica, looks like you have a question. I'm trying to be conscious of the time because in 5 minutes we have to make off Parks and Recs.
I know. So maybe this is a question better for offline, but I know that a lot of residents I have up in D, and thank you, Chair, for recognizing my question. And I know we talked a bit about this, Alexis. So anytime you want to do any, if I'm understanding correctly, if you want to do any landscaping work at all, putting in patio pavers, anything, we should have folks go to get an inland wetland permit?
Not necessarily a permit. So there are certain activities that are you're allowed to do within proximal to an inland wetland and water course, and that includes maintenance of a residential property. So if you have lawn that's adjacent, even if you have a lawn 5 feet from a wetland, you are allowed to continue to mow that lawn. So maintenance is allowed. It's just when they do the larger activities that are changing the landscape, then they really should reach out and talk to us. And then we, for free, we had 2 of these today where we went out and we met the homeowners, and because they kind of had these ideas about what they're going to do with their landscape, and we talked to them about what needs a permit, what doesn't need a permit, how to articulate what they want to do, and to basically cover themselves to make sure that what they're going to do is not going to get them into trouble. And it is just a simple form. They say, hey, I want to cut down these 2 trees and I want to clear this patch over here of multiflora rose, but that's it. And we just say, sounds good. So
that's really
hopefully that answers your question.
That absolutely does. And thank you so much. That's great to hear about the process. I appreciate it.
Trying to talk really fast.
I know, thank you for talking fast. And then the other thing is part of the problem is that there could be heavy fines, right? That if people don't do the right thing, then they have to remediate, and that's extremely expensive, right? So how's the enforcement? And then we'll let you go.
Yeah, so absolutely. So actually I was at a property earlier today where one neighbor eventually had came in to call to complain that the neighbor adjacent to him had cleared the whole hill slope adjacent to a water course. And unfortunately, this had happened last summer. And so he didn't want to, tattle on the neighbor. So he didn't let us know that this clearing was happening when it was happening. And that's unfortunate, because if we had gone out there when it was happening, we would have talked to the neighbor that was doing the clearing and let them know before they had a really, really big, expensive problem that they now have. So they kind of continued on and did a bunch of clearing, unfortunately. And when there is a wetland violation, I was saying earlier that wetland regulations don't outright prohibit anything, but they do require that you get a permit first. And so the way that we resolve violations is that we order people that have a wetland violation to apply for what's called a corrective action permit application. So you still need to get a permit. And in that permit, you have to articulate the activities that you've already done, and then corrective activities that you are going to do. And a corrective action permit is twice as expensive as a regular permit. So it definitely gets expensive, and you're now doing kind of restorative work that you didn't plan on doing in addition. So yeah, we try to be as open to the public as possible. Go out to properties for no charge. We'll meet you at your property, do I call it the point and look tour, and really work hard to avoid violations.
Thank you. And I think the more we know, the better we can help our constituents. So it's great. Well, thanks everybody. With 6 minutes to go, and Darlene, I know, has to start her committee, and I'm on it, so I got to make sure I make it. Thank you all for coming and giving us this background. Good work at school. Good luck at school, Ms. Collins. We appreciate all the help that you gave us, and to say thank you to your other colleague, your other intern. We really appreciate it. And then we'll see most of the rest of you guys on May 26th. Alexa, make sure it's in your calendar for the 26th.
Oh, 26th. I say the 23rd. It is on my calendar. I've done.
Yeah, we need you there, so make sure you got the right date.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to adjourn.
Yes, I need a motion to adjourn, and thank you, Tom. All right, see you all later. Thank you so
Voting.
much.
Have a good night.
Good night. Night all.
Thank you.
Be well.
Brian, for setting us up. Good, bye.